Okay, so here is another review. Tom O'Neill's book, which is basically called Chaos. Yet another Charles Manson book. I read this one a little bit through 2020 and pretty much finished it in early 2021. This was a book that I actually really wanted to buy, and I found in a bookstore just by chance. And so I was really excited, and when I got it. This review is, of course, just my opinion. And of course, there are going to be spoilers, and I'm not going to summarize the points of the book either. I'm just going to review it. So if you haven't read the book, then a lot of this will probably not make any sense to you. I wrote this review in March of 2021, so just bear with me. If the things that I said in here, kind of don't make sense now. But anyway, bottom line first, I don't think that this book is really worth the praise that it's gotten over the past couple of years. And I know that's controversial because this book has been really hot. This book has been hot, hot, hot. And people have just been lauding it. People just love this book. They really do. And personally, I don't know why. Last year in 2020, I really wanted to read the book since it had gotten a lot of praise since its release. Chaos is the 20-year project that overtook its author Tom when initially he was hired in 1999 to create a piece for a now defunct magazine for the 30-year anniversary for the Tate LaBianca murders. The book is a slow start, and to be honest, I read it out of order at first, going straight to the Filippo Tenerelli section, as you could probably see from my channel, when I obviously made the book or the video on Tenerelli's case. I found the subject interesting that yet another man had been potentially murdered by the Manson family, since there had been rumors of them killing somewhere around 35 people. But when the Tenerelli portion came, I found it hard to believe that the Mansonites would have had anything to do with him. Despite people thinking that Tenerelli was murdered by them, I just don't feel that way. And even after making my video on him and getting apparently family members saying, no, the Manson family killed Tenerelli, I still feel that way. I don't think it makes sense because either he was killed by the Manson family and Tom O'Neill did a horrible way of explaining that, which honestly I can believe, or it just wasn't the Manson family. Either way, that's not really the point of this review, but that was one of the first things that already, introduced me to the very weird arguments and conclusions that Tom O'Neill would come to. I headed back to the beginning of the book, and it was really hard to get past the first 20 pages. The book is a slow starter for about the first quarter of the book. It wasn't until page 120 or so that it started to pick up. It took me months to get past larger portions of it because the writing style is just not for me. This is my own opinion, and I don't hold it against the author at all, but I am not into the journalistic diary-type narrative that he wrote the book in. Personally, I like a book that has the typical writing approach to a story, and I feel like this book was just one huge news article told from the first-person point of view, and that's why it was such a turn-off to me. It was like I think that's like a 400 or 500 page book. Could you imagine reading a 500-page news article? One thing I do hold against the author, though, is the way he approached people. Maybe I am just too young and from a different generation, but he seemed to come off as an arrogant man who demanded answers even when there weren't any. I had a hard time reading his story when most of the time he would badger people into giving him what he wanted, even when his permissions were revoked. I don't understand how he couldn't see that the way he mistreated people may have had something to do with the lack of answers he would get. Yet there were some people he talked to that were corrupt, but who could really appreciate someone coming to your house to cold call you about a 30-plus-year-old murder case. It was really hard to believe a majority of what he said in his book when there were errors strewn throughout. The first error I came across was on page 16, where he stated that Tex Watson was from East Texas. And I know that this might seem like a small detail to other people, especially if you're not from Texas, but, God damn it, I live in Texas, and he was wrong. Everyone who knows about this case, they know that Tex is from the Dallas area. You can look it up. Super easy. He was born in Farmersville, then grew up in Copeville, which are both right by Dallas, which is North Texas. This is a simple Wikipedia search that told me this. And Tom O'Neill did not get that right. On page 286, O'Neill stated that Michael Bruner was Manson's first child. This is also wrong. Michael is Manson's third child, though he is Mary Bruner's first child. On page 116, O'Neill made the rather useless emphasis that Dean Morehouse had allegedly stayed in Cielo Drive. This was originally talked about in Helter Skelter, which is on page 496. Bugliosi only mentioned this in passing, though, and it is a rather pointless fact. It has no bearing on much of anything, let alone the murders. On page 369, improperly quotes Helter Skelter again from page 626. It does not say that it may have been something that he learned from others. There are more odd claims that I find hard to believe, and with just these few errors above, it has made his whole argument hard for me to believe. The book focuses mostly on how Bugliosi lied. Helter Skelter was a fake theory. And instead, it tries to say that Charles Manson was some sort of CIA informant that avoided going back to prison thanks to his government ties. O'Neill implies that Manson used drugs to brainwash his followers to commit crimes, and yet he denies that Bugliosi's theory, Charles Manson, brainwashed his followers to commit crimes. The only difference is that Tom O'Neill doesn't believe in the race war. I listened to an interview of Nicholas Schreck where he pointed out the same thing. Schreck stated that O'Neill's book makes no sense in that matter, and of course I agree. Beyond that, the book is hard to follow because there is just page after page of useless information that doesn't prove his point. He relies on the interviews he had with people that knew people that either worked on the Manson case or may have been government spies. He barely provides any actual evidence for his claims, and instead he just says that he has a credible source. The government conspiracy theory chapters were by far the worst. It had very little to truly segue from point to point. For example, when Tom O'Neill brought up Sharon Tate's photographer Sharok Hatami, Hatami claimed that he was forced to testify at the trial, or else a man named Reeve Whitson would have had him deported or shot. Somehow this was the perfect segue to start on the government CIA conspiracies, and there was like another 20 pages just talking about how people that knew Reeve really believed that he worked for the CIA. Even if this man did, there was no actual proof that he had anything to do with Tate LaBianca, and Sharok Hatami claims that Reeve may have called him before the bodies were discovered. One point that never seems to be talked about is if Manson really was a CIA informant, why did he have so many people killed? What was it about Gary Hidman, Tate LaBianca, and the people killed afterwards that the CIA needed someone to kill them? In fact, Tom O'Neill barely focuses on the LaBiancas, and he almost never mentions Stephen Parent at all. These facts alone make this book very hard to believe. What would Stephen Parent have done to, to justify being murdered by the government? He was only 18 or 19 years old. I really don't believe in 1969 that a 19-year-old would have needed to be murdered by the CIA. I mean, he wasn't David Koresh. Let's be real, people. I couldn't help but think as I read this book, because I would take a bath and I would relax and I would read this book and I would flip through the pages and I couldn't help but think, this took 20 years to make? This took 20 years to make. You've got to be kidding me. Well, I read the book. Other reviews will bring up how majority of the interviews in the story are from lawyers, cops, and friends of friends from the murder scenes. But not once did Tom O'Neill even seem to think about talking to anybody that participated in the murders. He honestly didn't seem to talk to any of the family members other than Susan and Charlie. From 1999 to 2017, he didn't stop once and think about sending a letter to anyone other than Charlie. At the end of the book, he got a phone call from Charlie, but his demeanor pissed Manson off. People such as Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten could have been good sources of information, but he didn't even seem to think of talking to them. He could have even tried talking to Susan before she died. In fact, still to this day, Leslie Van Houten, Bobby Beausoleil, Charles Watson, Bruce Davis are all alive, and they are still in prison. I don't understand some of the claims that Tom O'Neill made, such as saying that Atkins was at the LaBiancas having stabbed Leno with the fork, when other sources state that she went with Kasabian and Grogan to potentially kill Saladin Nader. But this might just be yet another mistake on Tom O'Neill's part. Despite how much people don't like Susan Atkins and don't believe anything she says, I do thoroughly believe she was not at the LaBianca residence on the night of their murder. Personally, I don't think that this book is worth the buy. I barely even feel like it's worth the read. If you want to read it, I would say to rent it from a library, but don't waste your money. If you've already gone down the Manson rabbit hole like I have, you won't find anything new here. The book doesn't talk about any of the family members in any new ways. It just shocks me that a piece of crap like this took 20 years to make. It doesn't surprise me that he had someone help him piece the book together, because his writing is just too fragmented to make any sort of sense. I'm not attacking Tom O'Neill's character necessarily, and I don't hate him. I don't hate anybody. It's pointless. But I think that books like these are honestly a tragedy, because if you're going to talk about this subject, which honestly is a dead horse, it's been beaten over and over again. This is over 50 years old now. Couldn't you bother to bring something new that isn't just batshit crazy? I feel like if you're going to talk about some sort of new viewpoint, maybe you should actually have some more legitimate sources than the things you're saying. And if you're going to source certain things to prove your point, you should actually source them correctly instead of course, twisting certain quotes to fit into your narrative. Now, I know that especially since Vincent Bugliosi's death, more people are coming out against Helter Skelter and against Bugliosi, which is perfectly fine, because to tell you the truth, I don't believe Helter Skelter either. But the idea that some crackhead like Charles Manson was hired by the CIA to kill Sharon Tate, like, that doesn't make sense either. Some I've read, of course, it's MK Ultra, it's this or that, LSD was created by the government, this, that, and the third. But beyond all of that, the government's been up to some crazy stuff. But I feel like, what does this have to do with Charles Manson? What does this have to do, you know? And especially now, after having read both of Susan Atkins's books, who have talked about nothing anywhere near this, I feel like this really shows that Tom O'Neill has made no real points. Once again, I don't recommend this book. It's a waste of time, you know, and I've seen a lot of people say, you know, there's a lot more crap out there when it comes to Manson books than good. And I definitely agree. And I definitely think this is not one of those books to read. You know, I'm not trying to shill for anybody else, but there are definitely plenty of other good things to read out there. Believe me.